Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Eickhoff, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of Alumni Operations here at John Carroll University. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our next installment of A.C.E.S, the Alumni Continuing Education Series. A.C.E.S was established in the spring of 2013 by the Office of Alumni Relations in the spirit of lifelong learning. The program offers enrichment opportunities for our members of our alumni community and friends of the university by providing opportunities to connect with our outstanding faculty and other experts in the fields. Over the past year, we've heard from experts in ethics and leadership, the political and economic impact of COVID-19, racial equity and social justice, disruptive technology, neurodevelopment, communication and marketing, just to name a few. Tonight, we will explore K-12 education and the role it plays in our communities. This program is the third installment of our series focusing on K-12 education. And tonight, we'll specifically talk about the role of school counseling and the needs of our students as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Before I introduce our moderator, I would like to share a few housekeeping items with you. We encourage you to view the program in full screen mode. And if you feel like you'd like to, we encourage you to have your camera on. Additionally, please stay muted through the duration of the program. Following the moderated discussion, we will use the chat feature to moderate your questions and provide those to the panel on your behalf. It is now my honor to introduce our moderator for this evening, Dr. Andrew Intagliata. Andy Intagliata is a third year as an assistant professor at John Carroll University, where he serves as the school counseling program coordinator. He is a proud three-time graduate of the University of Toledo and is licensed in the state of Ohio as both a school counselor and professional clinical counselor. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Intagliata. Andy, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. First of all, thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank our panelists for attending. I do have a little bit of an imposter syndrome just because I know this is a JCU alum event, and I feel really bad. I didn't go to JCU, so I'm hoping that I have a JCU shirt on, so I hope that kind of makes up for things. I'm also really sorry. I didn't realize tonight was opening day for the Cleveland Guardians, so if any of you are also watching the game at this time, I hope it ends up well for you. I'm a Tigers fan, but I can still root for Cleveland every once in a while. Due to all of that, thank you for joining us. It's been really nice to organize this event just because I think you're all probably seeing in education the need for mental health services and the need for that kind of focus in schools. And as someone who's not out in the field, I speak with my students in internship a lot just about what they're seeing at their internship sites. And I know across the board, it's been very difficult. We're very fortunate to have such a wide range of experience and guests tonight, and our panelists who work in various areas around Northeast Ohio. So I want to take the time to introduce them before I open up some questions we have for them. So I'll start alphabetically at the top. Suzanne Atkinson. So Suzanne is a recent grad, 2022 school counseling graduate at John Carroll University, and has also got her undergraduate at The Ohio State University, where she got a degree in psychology. She's currently on staff at Keystone High School in LaGrange, Ohio, serving as a high school counselor for all students with odd ending graduation years. So Suzanne, thank you for joining us tonight. Next, we have Jason Cleban. So Jason is from Wilmington, Delaware. He completed his undergraduate degree in Ithaca College, where he majored in history. He came to Cleveland in April 2016 in preparation for the Cleveland Cavaliers championship run. And then he started graduate school at John Carroll University, where he graduated with a degree in school counseling. And he completed his internship at West Geauga Middle School. And currently, Jason works at Elyria Catholic High School. So welcome, Jason. Thank you for joining us. Next up, we have Robert McCain. So Robert McCain is a school counselor at Davis Aerospace and Maritime High School in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. He's worked as a school counselor in the district since 2011, and for the 10 years prior to that, he was working as a teacher in the district. Robert got his degree at Kent State University, and then got a master's of teaching and education from Marygrove College, and then later went on to attain his school counseling degree from John Carroll University. And Robert is a member of both the American School Counselor Association and the Ohio School Counselor Association. So Robert, thank you for joining us tonight. And lastly, alphabetically, not by level of importance, Becky, is Becky Spiker. So Becky is currently a school counselor at Avon Middle School. She works with 6th to 8th graders and has been doing so for 8 years there. She studied psychology at the University of Dayton, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts. And later she enrolled at the school counseling program at John Carroll, where she got her school counseling degree. Becky is a member of the American Counseling Association, the Ohio School Counselor Association, the Lorain County Schools Crisis Counseling Team, and the Lorain County Prevention Connection. Becky completed her fieldwork in Westlake City Schools and Avon Local Schools. And in 2014, she interned at Avon Middle School, closely working with student services to master the programs and curriculum that the school offers to their students. And she joined the Avon Middle School staff in 2015 and continues striving to reach students' needs through classroom guidance lessons, social groups, and new student groups and individual counseling. So Becky, thank you for joining us tonight and taking the time to meet with us. So we have some questions, and some of these questions I've learned from some of my students as they go through the program. It's not all just to talk about what's going on now. We want to leave with some takeaways. So we do have some questions just obviously about some of the struggles and what they've seen for the past couple of years from a school counselor's perspective, but we also want to leave with some kind of on an upward note about what we can be doing as a field to kind of best prepare ourselves for the work that's going to come. One of the things that I try to check in with our site supervisors during my site visits is how do we best prepare our students to meet the needs in the coming future, whether that's a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I imagine a lot of you are probably realizing that this is going to be something that goes on for a few more years, the impact of what happened. So I'm going to open it up with the first question. Robert, I'm going to start with you if that's okay. So I mentioned that you work in Cleveland Metropolitan School District at Davis. So how have you noticed the needs of your students changing as a result of the pandemic?
Well, I just want to say once again, just thank you for inviting me. I appreciate this opportunity to speak. I have this, when the pandemic first started, I had this model that everything that was wrong or that was a problem was exacerbated by the pandemic. And it has continued to show itself over these last couple of years. Everything has just become heightened and become even more of a problem. Well, I won't say everything. Some things have turned out, for the better, but a lot of things that were a problem have become even worse of a problem there. In our city, in the inner city of Cleveland, of course, we continue to deal with poverty. Unfortunately, in our city, it continues to grow. We continue to see the effects of it on a daily basis in our schools. Homelessness has increased dramatically in our district and in our school. With the inflation up, we have so many of our families that are being mobile. They're being moved out of their homes into different situations, sharing houses with other families. Then we also have like food shortages and situations like that where students are coming to school hungry. Even more of them are coming to school hungry and not having adequate food at home. So they rely on us as a school to provide that for them. So that has been, as you can imagine, a difficult problem to try to navigate during this pandemic and through this situation. And then you add on to the effect of technology in our district and in our city, students not having adequate computers to learn, and then having adequate internet to get on and bandwidth. And then, I guess, I guess as a school and as a staff, we've kind of worked on having more empathy for our students. I think that's an important, task to kind of think about. We have students, another problem that we have is that students are coming in later now because they're working or they're dealing with other situations. And, there used to be this cutoff time where, 8:15, that was it. If you weren't in school by 8:15, you got a detention and there was no questions asked. Well, now, you have to create these individual plans for these students because they're working and, they're really providing for their family because they're dealing with a lot of these issues from the pandemic. So we've just seen a lot of problems that have just been heightened because of it. And, we continue to try to navigate it and work through it on a daily basis.
Thank you, Robert. And Suzanne, I'm going to ask the same question to you. I know you work in a different area than Robert. Robert mentioned he works in inner city Cleveland. You're in LaGrange, which obviously is just a different area, but I'm curious if what needs you've seen from your students as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone who doesn't know, LaGrange is a relatively rural area of Ohio. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't affected by the pandemic. It absolutely was. And I'm always going to approach every single one of these questions tonight from the stance that I am still a first-year counselor. And so there are still things and a lot of data that I'm gathering on my particular school district. I've been pretty fortunate to work for a couple of different school districts, either in intern roles or long-term sub roles. So I'm still learning, but this is for the most part what I've identified so far. So there's a lot of differences, I think, that have come as a result of the pandemic, though I can't necessarily vouch for how it was before, just because, lucky me, I started being out in the field right in spring of 2020. So I don't really know what a normal looks like before then, which is a huge plus for me as a counselor. There is no beforehand to actually compare it to. But here are some of the things that I've heard from my colleagues and from different places that I've been, and also that I would agree with. So for us, there has been an increase in behavioral issues, and that's just not at my high school, but also at the middle school level as well. We're seeing a lot of increased behavioral issues at school. There's a lot of increased substance use down where I'm at, specifically with vaping and with marijuana. Just because it is readily available to them. But overall, I think there's kind of a, and I don't even know how I want to phrase this, but it's one way or the other. I think in some areas, the students have an increased awareness. Like I do think because they've had time to sit with how they feel, they might be better at least feeling it on their own, maybe not necessarily vocalizing it yet, depending on their life experience, or there's a total lack of awareness. And I think that's where you see some of those behavioral issues. And sometimes that can fall into their ability to socialize with people around them as well, just because a lot of them were robbed of a couple of really crucial years to socialize. Additionally, as a counselor, I think the main difference that I've identified is the amount that you have to advocate for your students post-pandemic has just increased. A lot of them are really good at vocalizing what they need from you. And sometimes they just need you to be there. They just need someone to be there for them. And lucky you get to be that honored person. And some of them really struggle to vocalize what it is that they need from you. And so that as a counselor is a really challenging thing to kind of navigate. And each student is different in their own way. I have yet to see two students who have exactly the same life story. So every day you're going to experience something totally different. You're going to learn someone's totally different life story. So the best piece of advice that I've taken is just to sit and actively listen to them and then advocate your heart out because you're going to need to.
Yeah. Thank you, Suzanne. So I'm going to direct this next question to Becky. So Becky, you've been at Avon Middle School since 2015. So you've been there since before and after and during the pandemic. So when you think of these past couple of years, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you faced as a school counselor?
Okay, so that we could talk about that forever, but I think my situation, like Suzanne and Robert said, I feel like I'm in a completely, we've got urban, suburban, and rural going on here. So I'm definitely in the suburb, domain. I consider myself extremely lucky. Honestly, I think our district is extremely lucky and the families are doing great for the most part. But we also have, some families who are not, and the assumption that they are doing great and the pressure to appear that you're still doing great. That has been one challenge for sure, among others. Definitely just increased mental health needs overall. Just kind of like, literally lines out the door. There's 2 counselors in our building and I would love to have more, but luckily I've had an intern from John Carroll the whole time and keep them super busy. Because we've got just lines out the door of kids who have got stuff going on, can't make it through the day. We've seen kind of a lack of coping skills going on with everything that's going on. They're still when they enter, at least in my building, they're only 11 years old. So they're still developing that, even if the world was perfect. So with the world we're in now, they just we're putting a lot on their shoulders. And then their parents are dealing with a lot as well. So they may not be able to give them as much guidance and attention that they would have a few years ago. And then those needs are also not always being met by different agencies or community resources, because the wait lists are long, the hospitals are full. For like our suicidal issues, like they can't get a bed in certain hospitals. So we've got students who really, really need some of these resources, not able to get them at least at first. And so we are just kind of dealing with it as we go until we can get them those resources. So that has been an increased demand for the counselors, and we have a social worker in our district, and she's been incredibly helpful too, just trying to combat that. Definitely, I think I've seen a drop in commitment and motivation, and that's kind of across the board, I think, with students, staff, and families. Just like we're kind of all drained, and there's some burnout and some, I don't know, just I think Suzanne said we've got to keep advocating. People are really worn out, and we're trying to show as much empathy as we can, but it's pretty tiring. So we have less subs that are available. So when you do have 1 second to breathe, you're usually covering for someone else. So that's been a huge challenge. I think trying to attempt to return to normal and return to our higher expectations now that we are in a somewhat normal setting, even though we have like a year and a half of deficit in our learning and normalcy and social learning and social skills that these kids would have been developing during that time. But we're still kind of jumping in as adults. We jump in and we're like, okay, things are back to normal. Let's do this. And these kids don't know what that normal was, and they don't know what that expectation was. So we're still trying to push them along and help them as much as we can. And then I guess the only other thing I will bring up for now is just the technology part of it. And there's so much that comes with that, good and bad. We've changed so much, and it really there's been a ton of good change, I think, with the technology in education. But different, we've offered, virtual and in person, sometimes at the same time, sometimes not at all. We've a lot of just continuous changes. But that was, not every family has the resources to have their student have their own device all the time, or have, 4 kids at home and they don't all have a computer to do their homework at home. And that's one thing, the kids are on them all day. They're distracted. There's a lot of screen time. Just lacking social development because they're constantly looking at their computers too. So sorry to be such a downer. There were a lot of challenges in there.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your honesty, Becky, because there are a lot of challenges. You're right. And Jason, I'm going to ask you the same question, because Becky alluded to the fact, Robert's in an urban district, Suzanne's in a rural district, Becky's in a suburban district, and you're at a private school in Elyria Catholic. So curious from your perspective, what some of the biggest challenges that you've noticed over the past couple of years with the students at your school?
Yeah. So one thing I'm definitely going to echo that what Becky was saying was the lack of external resources. We have a very high rise, especially this year, in mental health crises, suicidal ideation, and risk assessments, and getting them to a hospital bed, getting them to have an evaluation from a counselor or therapist or psychiatrist. We've sometimes it takes weeks. We've had I've called a parent and said, all right, we got an appointment. The next available one was a month and a half from now. I was like, well, how do we adapt? Because our normal policy is if this is something we do, we can't let you back in the building until you've been seen, so we know that it's safe. And from a liability perspective, but also, we're school counselors, we're not doctors, so we need to have like that middle ground, or that kind of cover your buns sort of thing. And we've had to really make some tweaks and changes to our policies because of just we can't have students missing a month and a half of school. At the same time, we do have students who miss, months of school, and some of them, are hospitalized, some of them aren't. And I'd say one of the biggest challenges of that is trying to decide how we're going to proceed with these students. Like, what are we going to do taking the students who have struggled so much this year with the return to normalcy, the, no longer having either all remote or half and half or mix it and up, like coming back full time and having to actually interact with all the people who they may have met through, web chats like this in the past, and all those social skills that will kind of like cut short the year before their 8th grade year for my youngest kids. And it's just kind of seeing where they're, where do we take them to next? Where do we get them to, to a point where, like, now how do we address their mental health? Like, a lot of them have benefited. We have definitely kids who, like, I had students who were having anxiety, couldn't come to school before the pandemic, and then they were perfect attendance when it was all online because they didn't have to physically come. And then we have the reverse of the kids, like, who were at home not doing anything, and when they came back, like, they started working better. But it's just, getting everyone back onto the same page, like, well, this is where we're at now, this is what we got to be doing. And a lot of people, I don't want to say they broke, but they were struggling, and they still are. A silly example is we had a large group of freshmen in 2020 who had, coupled up, started dating each other, forming couples. And the, majority of high school relationships, there's a bunch will last a couple weeks, maybe some months, some might go a little longer. And of course, there's always a couple that maybe go the long haul. But all of them, all through 2020 shutdown, all through last year, stuck together because they weren't interacting, they weren't meeting new people, they weren't kind of growing. And then we had like a 2-week period where I think it was like 11 to 12 couples all done all at once. It was madness, and it's like, some of it's like silly, like, why'd you break up? Oh, I just didn't want to talk to them anymore. It's like, it's the only person you've been talking to for a year and a half. Like, yeah, I guess you can be fed up with that. And it's just something that's kind of experienced, like, the drawn out of that social contract or that social relationship that wasn't there before. And that's also been challenging because they don't know how to treat each other. So I don't want to go on for forever because, as Becky said, like, there's no end. There's no end.
Yeah. Well, Jason, I appreciate your honesty as well. So I know Becky kind of mentioned we don't want to just be downers, and there has been some good, I think schools have responded effectively. So I wanted to ask the question, and so Suzanne, I'm going to start with you. I guess how do you think school counselors have responded effectively to all these challenges, or specifically, what have you seen that your school counseling program and department has done to effectively respond to the students' needs?
I'm going to try to list everything that I could think of. But like I said, I've bounced around quite a bit, and this is my first full year at one school. So I'm going to be pulling from different schools. This is not just Keystone where I'm currently at. But I'll try to hit as many points as I can. Okay. So the first thing, and I think this goes across the board, and I think it's absolutely like top 5 things that you need to be as a school counselor, no matter if you're kindergarten, 12th grade, it doesn't matter. No matter what, the best approach is to be flexible every day. Every day that you are going to go into your job, you might have a plan. I'm one of those people. I have a plan every single day, what I think I'm going to get done. 9 times out of 10, does everything on that list get done? Absolutely not. I would go as far as to say most times 10 out of 10. That doesn't happen. Because every single day, and Jason said this before with couples, like, you never know. It could be the day where 11 couples break up, and it's prom season at the high school level. So that certainly does happen sometimes. The other thing that I have found more helpful that I definitely, when I was an undergrad, I definitely didn't think was going to be helpful. And then at grad level, I started to really value it more, is data collection. At the high school level, that's a lot easier to do than I think some of the younger grades. But really, the best people to tell you the needs of the students and how to best serve those needs are the students. So hearing from them and getting data from them, I think is absolutely vital to any kind of counseling department that's out there. So have some sort of needs assessment is the second thing. I think that's becoming common practice, at least at the high school level. But I think that's a really effective way to start meeting the needs of your students. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, and I'm going to try not to talk too much about the interview part of this, but it is so important to have at least a stellar admin team that you can conference with if you need to. If you have a counseling department, if you are a department of one, it doesn't matter. Having admin that also 100% have your back and can be there to help you through the tough situations makes our job so much easier. My favorite question to ask when I was interviewing at a bunch of different high schools was to ask the principal, and then if I was lucky enough, the superintendent, how much they value mental health in their school community. And when I tell you, I made my decision because I did have 2 offers. I was very fortunate to have 2 offers at some point. When I tell you that that was ultimately how I made my decision of where I ended up and have not regretted it for a second, I mean that. The admin being a supporter, understanding what you do, valuing what you do, and giving you space to do it, space and time to do it, is super vital. So that's not necessarily an approach, but it's super important. So don't be afraid to ask them questions too. It's a 2-sided conversation.
Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate you asking that question. And I do tell my students, it's a fit thing. Just, you want to make sure that you feel like you're a fit in your school as well. And Becky, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Suzanne, because you actually mentioned that you feel like your school and your department has done a really good job at responding. So I'm curious, what are some things that you've seen that you've done effectively at Avon Middle School?
Yeah, I think just kind of like Suzanne said, just being flexible. And I guess when I think about my answer, I think about not just the counseling department. I mean, department, I guess it's, myself and the other counselor, but it really is our entire staff, our office staff, but then all of our teachers and our aides and everything, just being able to be adapting constantly and just trying to learn and adapt and figure out how to do different things. That willingness is probably our biggest strength, at least, within the people I work with. Just keep fighting, keep trying, keep learning, keep adapting. That's been the only way we can do it. We've offered a lot of different virtual options. This year we are back to, if you want to be within the district, you have to physically come into the school. But we do have a ton of assignments and like ways to go back and view things that we developed during the pandemic that we never had before, that, it was a pain in the butt to create that stuff, but now we've got it and it's awesome. So that is a huge plus. We have some good connections in the community just to help us with providing food for families who don't have food. If they can't make it to us to get that food, we get to them to do that. Getting them, connections with some community mental health resources. Some of those we are, lucky enough to have a couple come into the school here and there, because sometimes families just can't get them there, or they can't, the waiting list is crazy, and we've got that at least as like a spot check. So that's a huge bonus. Just bumping up our individual counseling and our group counseling to help these kids figure stuff out, and providing them social opportunities to help them just kind of figure out and fill that gap of like what they didn't get to do. Like I love Jason, your breakup thing. I'm not in a high school, so that I didn't get to see, and that was like beyond entertaining for me to think about, because I can only imagine. But that is real life, and that's like the stuff you're like, oh yeah, I would not even have thought of that, and that stuff is happening. So just letting them, we're younger, but we don't have recess anymore, so giving them like some opportunities to just kind of like hang out and learn how to get along with one another has been huge. And I guess last thing is like just having some sort of motivating factor. We've bumped up, like I'm sure everyone's heard of PBIS. We are trying to just like jump headfirst into that program. to get kids motivated. We're using it to motivate our staff and just reward kids and staff alike constantly, because it's been so much negative for so long. So we're really trying to, award kids through this system for doing the right thing, making it to school, going to class on time, doing your work, walking in the hallway, not screaming down the hallway, and whatever else. So that's been kind of a nice mental shift to look for the positive instead of the negative.
Thanks, Becky. And I have a couple more questions, and they're kind of linked. So I'm going to start with Robert. I'm going to ask you first this question. Well, when I'm doing our check-ins with our students, supervisors, one of the questions I ask is, how should we best prepare our students? So, given what you've seen at Davis, what types of issues or lasting effects do you think that you or other school counselors should be preparing themselves for when thinking about working with students in the future?
Yeah, I definitely think that, and it has been mentioned before. One of the issues that we are definitely dealing with, and I'm sure, like I said, everybody else is dealing with, is the unwillingness to see how important school is anymore. Because like I said, and I mentioned before, we've had students that, have suffered a great loss or have suffered great losses through this pandemic. So now they're taking on a role and responsibility of maybe providing and getting a job for their family. So now when you start to have these conversations about college and things after, it's like, well, no, I'm working now and I'm making $12 or $13 an hour. There's nothing you can really tell me right now. You can't tell me about college and things like that. And you can't even tell me how important a high school diploma is right now. So we have to create creative ways to get them to see how important it is again. So, I've created going on more field trips, more college trips, going on more internship trips, to get them motivated to see, okay, yes, you may be here, you may be making this, this money that you think is going to last forever right now, but, see the importance of continuing your education as you get out of high school. So, just that willingness to see how important school is, we're definitely seeing that, or not see how important it is. We're seeing that right now. And then just, we're also seeing challenges about, parental involvement. Like I said, we have a lot of students that have moved around, and actually, we've had a few deaths because of the pandemic. So we've had, some families suffer a lot throughout this. So having that parental involvement with our families has been a struggle during these last few years. So we've had to create different ways of reaching them where they are, maybe sometimes going to the home, having a home visit, or, just wherever, if we have to meet with them after school, anything like that, during this time, we just had to create different creative ways to kind of meet them where they are. So those are some ways that we're kind of seeing some of the lasting effects. And this, I believe, is going to continue over a while or for a long time. So as school counselor, we just have to create different ways to kind of reach the families and the students where they are.
Absolutely, Robert. Thank you. And Jason, I'm going to ask you the same question. What are you kind of preparing yourself for as far as lasting impact of this on students?
So absolutely, motivation is huge. A lot of students last year, when there was a lot of remote, and they're willingly admit to it, they cheated on a lot of their coursework, a lot of their tests and stuff, which is good, because not good, but their grades were good because of it. And then when they came back to school, a lot of them said, "Oh, I did really well in geometry. Let me take honors algebra. It's algebra 2. Let me take the honors class." And a lot of them got hit hard with the reality, like, well, when your parents aren't doing the work for you, it's a little bit tougher. Or when you can't get the answers from the classmates who have actually put the work in. So a lot of motivation from there. And another really big thing is just, in reality, a lot of these kids, they've lost a year of mental development. And it's something that I would say for at least a couple more years is just assume that majority of your students you're going to have, yeah, they may be, in 10th grade, but in reality, they're pretty much still freshmen. They missed out a whole lot, and it's not like they, skipped ahead. Like it was stalled out. So like knowing that a lot of the problems that typically by the time they finish finish middle school and started high school, a lot of the smaller stuff will kind of wean out. Like it's very rare that you'll see typically that you see parents having to drag a kid into a high school from the car. Like in middle school, I did my internship, so I've seen it. It happens, and seeing it in high school, this year was very shocking to me. Just saying, like, these are like, you're 14, 15 years old, like, your mother should not have to, like, drag you out of the car anymore. And it's something that seeing that, and just the way they interact with each other and the way that they approach learning, 100% what Robert said about just the motivation. Like, I don't see value in school. I don't see value. I don't see the point, and they don't care. It's they don't see it, and they don't know how to interact with each other. And everything is just behind. So I think for the next couple of years, I'm hoping in like 2 or 3 years that they'll get caught up enough, or enough time has passed that people will kind of grow through that. But a lot of our kids right now, as a school counselor, it's good to prepare yourself to realize that your seniors who are going off to college, live on their own. Most of them at the start of senior are not ready. They're not ready to make those decisions, even though that they're technically old enough to. And you'll have some who are, but a lot of kids, when they comes graduation time, we're getting close to it, and a lot of our kids, like, there's a handful who, yes, they did get into college and they're going to college. There's a lot who haven't even put together college applications, and they're not. And we have a handful like who going into career right away, but like there's a lot who have nothing planned. And part of that is also, as Robert said, parent involvement. I usually used to getting tons of emails and phone calls from parents all the time saying, "Oh, I need help getting my kid to do this and that." And it's, there's definitely some of that still, but a lot of parents, when they had to spend a year at home, they burnt out a lot faster, and they're like saying, "All right, you handle it," because they had a lot of times with kids at the table and the parents trying to get them the same thing that a teacher does every day, to get them to do the work. And it's rough, because now it's like, okay, now that you're done work, now come help me unload the dishwasher. Oh, we need to, mow the lawn or fold your laundry, or sort of thing. And it's a lot. And a lot of times they just step back and say, all right, whatever, you got it. We're not going to fight over something because they've already had too much. So I think that those are some of the bigger things that really, specifically into the pandemic, is knowing that you're going to have kids who aren't fully the age that, mentally at the age where they're at, and then the home life balance is getting better, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And that kind of leads into our last question. We've got a few questions from some people in the audience, but the last question that I had planned, and Robert, you already started to answer this question, so I'm going to start with you. Is just, you talked about what issues that you really think you're going to see, and what could last for a little bit or a long time. How could counselors best prepare themselves for the kind of work that they're going to be doing in the future? I know you already mentioned, finding new ways to reach students. You've talked about organizing field trips, but are there other things that we should be preparing ourselves for as far as the work we're going to do?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, one thing that I will say, I know sometimes being from the inner city, I'm kind of harsh with some of the things that I'm saying, but one thing that's good about our city is that we do have a lot of resources here in our city. So I guess as school counselors going into the field, just being aware of the resources that you have available in your city is very important. And there have been a lot of different resources that have been established since the pandemic, which I think is great that's come out of it. So just being aware of the different resources in your community, so that you can be able to help address the needs of the students, is very important. It's definitely vital. And then just I guess you just want to continue to make positive connections with the students. You want to make them feel comfortable, so that when they do have issues, that they are willing to come to you. And then you also want to have those meaningful conversations and meaningful relationship with staff. And like it was mentioned as well with administration as well, because you want to have, when situations arise, you want the administration to have your back, but you also want to have staff bring certain issues to you that the students have so that they can be addressed and that you can meet their needs. So just being available, being flexible, being aware of your resources, and just creating different ways to make sure that you meet the needs of the students.
Thank you, Robert. And Suzanne, I'm going to end with asking you. I know Robert mentioned a lot of resource. You're obviously in a different environment, just being out in a rural area. And when you think about the work that you're going to be doing at Keystone, or other counselors will be doing, how do you see yourself best preparing for the next few years as a school counselor?
So I echo everything Robert said. Definitely, when you get into your district, as much resources you can get it together, because quite frankly, you never know what you're going to come across. Certainly, if I would bet on what my first year of counseling looks like, I definitely would not have bet it looked like this year. There's not a chance I could have guessed the things that have happened. I definitely would not have guessed this. So just any resources that you come across, even if you think you'll never use it, just hold on to it. You never know. And then worst case scenario, maybe you shred it someday, but keep it for the long haul if you can. I wrote down a couple of things. Some of them are about counseling, and then some of them are about being a counselor. So I'll try to pick a way to go about this. Just to call back to something that was mentioned before regarding students specifically with the pandemic. And I'm seeing this a lot with my freshman class. Their normalcy is chaos. Through their middle school years, a lot of chaos went down. And they just started, I think, and this is just my own personal opinion, I think they just started to figure out what the world looks like, and then the world totally shifted on them. And since then, nothing has really been guaranteed in their minds. And with that chaos mindset of like, you never know when things are going to change again. And I also think that's why we have issue with buy-in and long-term decision-making and planning as well. Have techniques ready for anxiety, because with that chaos comes a lot of anxiety. And sometimes a student will come down and tell you, I think I totally just failed my chemistry test. And that might not actually be what's making them anxious. You might have to dig a little deeper with them. So just be prepared to kind of ride that wave with them. Definitely be comfortable with doing a suicide risk assessment. I know it's been mentioned here a couple of times tonight. You definitely need to be ready to have those conversations, because they will come across probably sooner rather than later. And that's really unfortunate, but it is part of our job. And be prepared to have those conversations with parents too. I was surprised when I was in my internship sites, and then continue to be surprised. I never have issue talking to the students about it. I always have issue talking to the parents about it, because you sometimes are delivering, and I would say more often than not, heartbreaking news to parents. And so if you need a script, if that makes you feel better about it, you can have a script, but have a way that you can go about telling them in a way that you feel like is going to produce effective results from them, and that they're going to get outside help for their student, but not panic them. And that's really hard to do, because the parents usually care a lot when you deliver that information. So their anxiety is also a wave you might have to ride. The last three that I have are more specifically about being a human while being a counselor. I think I actually wrote down here, like, be a human multiple times. And there are three things really that means to me. So be involved, but have boundaries. I am also, on top of being a counselor, I'm a senior class advisor, which means I plan all sorts of fun things like fall homecoming, and we did a trivia night this year, and that's an added responsibility to my job. But have the boundaries of, like, during this panel, I had a student email me, probably an email that I'm going to respond to tonight, but do as I say, not as I do. Normally, I would say don't answer your email once you leave your job. That is so hard to do, but usually you will thank yourself, because you can't pour from empty glass. Have your space, and by your space, I mean your office. This sounds so arbitrary. Have your space be one that you're comfortable in. And don't be afraid to show your personality in your space. The kids like to see that you're a human, and it makes you more approachable as a counselor. Sometimes one of the barriers that I think I have faced in my different schools as having a counselor title is that the title scares them off. They don't see you as a human, they see you as a counselor. Yeah, Robert, I need to take my own advice too. But sometimes they see you as a counselor, and I try so hard to remind my students, like, counselors are human too. You're not always going to vibe with every single one of them. I will be eternally grateful if you vibe with me, and I will always cherish that, but I'm not going to be offended if you don't. And then the last one that I have found to be most necessary, because there are definitely going to be car rides home, and I don't mean to scare anyone, but there are definitely going to be rides home where you're probably going to cry. I definitely have, or you're going to be really upset. Some people are not criers, but you're going to be upset because there are tough days. And I think, as much as I can remember, it was stressed in grad school to have that list of self-care ready to go. I have like go-to things that I do for specific tough situations, but have that list of self-care ready. And also have some reminders, like physical reminders in your office too. I have a really great quote. And I really hate to call back to Gilmore Girls because I think that shows my age a little bit. But it's a Gilmore Girls quote. It's the grandpa, and he says to Rory at one point in time, great heart and great character will always win the day. And so I have that, and I've had that on every computer screen that I've ever had as a counselor, because as long as you're trying your best, and as long as you're doing everything feasible as you could possibly do, while also establishing those boundaries and making sure that you are a human, you're doing all that you can do. You're one person, there's usually hundreds of them. And so it is not possible to always meet the needs all the time of every single student. And that's really, really hard to come to terms with sometimes. And that's it. Sorry to go on a tangent, but that's all that I wrote down.
No, you're fine, Suzanne. It was as if you were sensing the first question that somebody in the audience had. So I'm not going to have you answer this necessarily, because the first question, Suzanne, was how as school counselors do you avoid burnout? And how do you kind of tend to your own mental health? So I know, Suzanne, you talked about not checking your email and being able to kind of have that space that is you. But Jason, Becky, Robert, I mean, how do you kind of tend to your own mental health and avoid burnout as a counselor?
Yeah, I mean, step one is the work-life balance. I make a point where if it's an emergency, I'll respond to it, of course. We use Google Chats and previously Google Hangouts as like a way to messaging, so students can like essentially send a text message to us, which is both great because it's a way of like, if I don't need like, oh, hey, during your study hall, come see me. I just type it out real quick. I don't need to send an email. I don't need to, make any calls. I don't have to walk down and grab a kid and say, hey, come on, we gotta go talk. But it also means that they technically have access to me 24/7. I make a strong point of, I have it set up so I can like, look at it sometimes or just get the notification. And unless it's an emergency, I won't respond to it until Monday. Even on weekends. Like that's the hardest part, is when they message something that you want to address. It's like, oh, I could easily answer this, but it's like, well, it's 8 o'clock on a Thursday night. If I answer it now, then the next time they reach out and I don't answer it, they're going to assume that I can. So that's huge. And then the other one is just, when you're at work, you're going to get, a ton of times, either sometimes teachers or admin or other, people in the building are going to ask, you're going to give you tasks to do. And there's nothing wrong with being helpful and taking on more work, but knowing that if your plate is full, knowing when to say no. It's incredibly hard, but sometimes, it's just like, listen, like I would love to help you with that, but unfortunately, it's not something that I can do. And I don't have time to do that. And it's okay to set those boundaries up, because a lot of times if you don't have the boundaries, then you wake up, 3 weeks later and you realize, oh, I've been doing these extra duties for 3 weeks and you're not getting paid more for them. So and B, it's taking away and detracting from the important work, which is, your school counseling, so your mental health, your career and future planning, and all that stuff.
I'll tag on just super briefly because Jason, you took both things I was gonna say. So no, you're good. I think that means it's a good answer. So yeah, definitely be able to stop your day and do your own thing and enjoy your life when you get home as much as possible. Suzanne, I love that you said you saw an email. I literally saw an email from a student and an email from a teacher on my phone. So I'm swiping them away. I will read them in the morning, but like I do that too. I feel like we have to stop, and it is hard to do because as a counselor, we go into this field because we like to help people. We like to be there for people. But saying no to people, knowing your boundaries, whether that's when you get home, you put your phone away or your computer away or whatever, or you tell some of your best friends at work that are your coworkers, sorry, I cannot help you, because you just can't do it all. And then also, sounds ridiculous, but eat lunch. Like that never happens. I'm so glad you all had that reaction. I have to hide in my office and eat my lunch, and people still come in and knock, and I seriously have to hide, but do it. Otherwise, all of a sudden it's the end of the day and you're losing your mind.
Well, I appreciate all of your honesty, and I also understand the challenge just with, a lot of you talked about students had to transition to online, and the way that we had to be connected with them was through electronic communication. And I think it made a lot of counselors and a lot of teachers and a lot of people in education more accessible than ever before. And now you transition back into school, and there's still that maybe expectation that you're still just as connected as previously. One of the questions that came in was, are any of you at your schools using evidence-based programs for your school counseling program? And I will add a question on to the end of that. If none of you happen to be using any evidence-based programs, would you like to be, and why?
So I'm not, I don't think we really use a whole lot yet. And it's something that I feel like, my first year at this school was, 2020, 2019, 2020. So we had a lot of things that we were planning on implementing and starting up, but a lot of it never got off the ground. Part of that is because I was still learning, what is it like, what is being the primary. And then when COVID hit, we had to change everything. I half love the idea of them, and I also half hate the idea of them. My experience with a lot of those types of programming and stuff like that is that it's a very specific way of trying to do things, and a lot of stakeholders, like specifically admin, get the idea. They hear about these and they say, this is what we want to do, this is what we need you to do. And sometimes it's very beneficial, but their always concern is, well, at what point, what's the top priority, which is mental health. And if all those breakups are, if you have a string of risk assessments you have to do, all the evidence-based everything just goes out the window. And rightfully so, if you ask me. Like, those are all things that are definitely worth it. And I mean, this even kind of ties back to the thing I said before about setting boundaries, but it's also like, there are times when, there's work and there's things that like you want to do and it's very beneficial, but if it's something that if what you're doing, if it doesn't directly benefit everything that you're currently doing, it's very difficult to make that change. And it's very difficult to even like want to put that effort in. And I can't say that I want the evidence-based, any extra stuff like that, but I can't 100% say I don't want it. I just haven't maybe found, the right one. The right one hasn't come around yet. So I'm open to it, but I'm not actively searching for it. I'm too busy focused on my daily and the current things that we have going
I think the two main roadblocks that we've run into this year specifically at the high school level for me have been serving individual needs. I do a lot of individual meetings with students, and that takes up a lot of my time. So as much as I would love to do programming, evidence-based programming, specifically, like not just with individuals, because I do think that small groups are not only like necessary, but also like a really efficient way of dealing with common problems. We just really have not, and I know that sounds arbitrary to say, we have not had the time. We haven't really even had the time like to eat lunch. So like we haven't had the time to implement any of them. The other roadblock I think that we've run into this year, and I don't know, because this really only is like year 2 of them existing, how many high schools have adapted to this additional responsibility. But grad plans and grad plan meetings take up a lot of time that previously I don't think existed. And so we're kind of just pulling it out of nowhere. But the amount of information that you have to cover in those individual grad plan meetings takes up a lot of additional time that personally I think would be better used towards finding programs to meet the students' needs. I understand the need for them as the complexity of graduation requirements increases. However, I do feel sometimes like just repeating the same thing over and over again. I'm the crazy one that does like 20 in a day if I can, just to knock them out. But by the end of that day, I have no voice. So those are the 2 main roadblocks that I've run into at least.
Thank you, Suzanne. We've got a couple more questions from the audience. The first is just, says right now Congress has not provided funding to continue the federally funded lunch program for all K through 12 students. So how do you think that will impact our students going forward?
For us, I think that's going to impact the students a lot. It's going to impact the families a lot too. It's been able to take away some of the financial and mental burden, take away an extra task that they have to do, something to figure out. There's part of me that I think, I mean, I still want to provide those resources to students who need it. Having just give that, you know, and this might be an unpopular opinion, give it to every single kid, I think is maybe not the best policy. I think having it for just figuring out who needs that and giving it to them is what we did in the past. And I think it was a good situation. I know times are a little bit different, and we maybe give that, you know, our qualifications for who might need that might have definitely changed. But I think just saying anyone and everyone might not be the best.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. We'll end on what I hope is a positive note. So this question came from Dr. Scho. So what gives all of you hope that students are building resiliency?
I'll start.
All right, Robert, you go.
No, go ahead, Becky. I can go after you. Go ahead.
I like that one is, I'm glad you're ending on this. I feel very hopeful and positive on this one. I feel like I'm just like every day so impressed at how resilient they are. I don't think they're building it. I think they just, they're born resilient and they're amazing and they just figure it out. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. You go, Robert. They're great.
I'm going to second that point because I actually love this generation of kids because they are like super resilient and, you know, they're so outspoken and they're like go-getters. Like that's the part that I love about them. They are built like that. Like you said, automatically is what I say. But then there's like these glimmers of hope every day that I see in kids. Like there's, you know, there may not be a big celebration or a big event that they accomplish, but it's always these little glimmers of hope that you see them progressing, you see them getting better. You see them now that we are like fully in school, getting a little more mature, like every day, you know, so there's these glimmers of hope that you have to look in the kids. And when you make these connections with the students and you notice these things on a daily basis, that's what gives you hope to keep coming back every day. So, yeah.
I'll third it. I love my job probably too much. I get excited to go every day. I know we've said a lot of maybe scary, negative things. I love my job probably too much. Get to know your students. You will see just how resilient they are. I call them the generation of trailblazers because I really do think that they are trailblazers.
Oh, absolutely. I love being a school counselor. I love complaining about things too, which is, great. But in reality, like all the complaints, the small complaints really it's easier to say, but it's just seeing a student, t- today, I have a student who we've had to put on academic probation because he had he had failed math like the first semester and he was, at risk of failing again. And today I went to go talk to his math teacher, not even about him, just to talk about something else. And I was like, oh yeah, I heard you guys had a quiz. And she's like, and guess who got 100% on it? And it was like, he's a junior who's like, he came to our school because, he needed help. And it was just really crazy to see something so small, but me and the teacher got really hype about it. We were really oh my God, this kid who, didn't have a single grade in math above a C- the entire year. But then, I guess technically third quarter, but now fourth quarter is really, he's getting 100%. He's been putting the effort in. He learned finally that if you do the work, you learn the content, and then he's really smart. He could easily do it. And just seeing them push through and get that, and seeing a lot of the relationships form, some of the friendships, just seeing different athletic groups, the different pods. When you walk down the hall, you see clusters of friends all through the halls, and some days you'll see someone's having a rough day and you're surrounded by people who are just trying to support. We had during we're a Catholic school, so they have mass, and during mass something was said, and one of our students started crying, and they came and grabbed me, and by the time I got there was 8 students around having a circle, and they're having almost a group therapy session for this one kid. And I was like, I guess I don't need to be here. I'm just going to stand up to the side in case you need me. But they were they got each other. It was really, it was really nice. Really nice. And seeing that these people are, they're trailblazers, but they're also they know that they're not solo trailblazers. They're a team, and it's something that really seeing them come together has been very lifting.
Well, I think that's a good note to end tonight on. So, first of all, I just want to thank our panelists again. So, Jason, Becky, Robert, Suzanne, thank you. Not just for sharing your knowledge, but also for those of you in attendance. Jason, Becky, and Robert have supervised students from John Carroll before. Suzanne might not know it, but I'm probably going to send students her way in a year or two for her to supervise. So I'm going to thank her in advance for that. Thank you for Dr. Scho for coming up with the idea for this event. This is the third in the series. They talked previously about, from a teaching perspective and administration perspective, but we really wanted to have one on school counseling. Thank you, Eric, for organizing, hosting, moderating the event. And then thank you all the people in the audience. Thank you for attending, taking time out of your night. So I'm going to turn over to Eric for some closing remarks.
Randy, thank you so much. And Suzanne, Robert, Becky, Jason, it was such an awesome conversation. It is clear that you love your jobs. As a university, we're incredibly fortunate to have you within our community. But I can pretty much say that your districts are amazingly fortunate to have you as committed school counselors, helping students along the way as they grow and develop into young men and women. So thank you again for sharing your time tonight, but sharing your expertise and your knowledge. Before we conclude, I wanted to share a few other opportunities for you all in our audience to take advantage of through the Office of Alumni Relations. John Carroll University will celebrate one of its newer traditions, Founders Day, on April 19th, 2022. The tradition allows John Carroll to honor its rich heritage while celebrating its mission and identity. This year, we'll have a variety of opportunities for you to take a part in. At noon on April 19th, the university will host a spiritual reflection via Zoom featuring Brother Matthew Wooters of the Society of Jesus and a member of the John Carroll University class of 2009. On the evenings of the 19th and 20th, various alumni chapters throughout the nation will host social gatherings, bringing members of their local JC communities together, rekindling bonds of friendship. Later in the spring, we'll host programs on the Ohio and Erie Canal and the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, the Cleveland Cultural Gardens, and how to overcome your fears. For more information and to register for all of our upcoming programs, including the Alumni Author Series, Scholarly Luncheons, our A.C.E.S series, and our Alumni Spotlight events, visit jcu.edu/alumni. Additionally, we invite you to view recordings of our previous programs on the John Carroll University Alumni Association YouTube channel. To view our extensive library, search John Carroll University Alumni on YouTube. Finally, please consider a charitable gift to John Carroll in support of our students, our outstanding faculty like Andy, and our entire campus community. If you've already made a gift this year, thank you so much for your generosity. If you have not, please join me on April 20th, John Carroll University's Day of Giving, to give to what you love, so that John Carroll can continue to deliver an outstanding education for our current and future Blue Streaks. If you would like to make a gift, please visit jcu.edu/give. Thank you again for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed it. Take care, be well, stay safe, and onward on John Carroll.